welcome to the Mobility Innovators Podcast.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to welcome all listeners from around the world to the Mobility Innovators Podcast. I'm your host, Jaspal Singh. Mobility Innovators Podcast invite key innovators in the transportation and logistics sector to share their thought about the key changes in the sector, about their work, and what is their forecast for the future. This is our second podcast on blockchain technology. It is the right time to discuss this topic and advocate for the same. Our today's guest is not only conceptualizing, but converting some of the futuristic idea into reality. He's the CEO and co-founder of Iomob, a decentralized internet of mobility network. Since obtaining his Ph.D. in the strategy and entrepreneurship at the University of Colorado in 2001, he spent the past 2 decades focused on accelerating the path to a low-carbon sustainable economy. This includes publishing 3 books and starting a handful of ventures in the smart city and sustainability arena. I'm so happy to welcome Cohen, CEO and co-founder of Iomob. Before starting this episode, I would like to share a few general definitions for the audience. A blockchain. Blockchain is a virtual decentralized database or ledger, often encrypted for security and maintaining a permanent and tamper-proof record of transactional data. It is managed by a computer, allowing a peer-to-peer network, whereby each of the peers in the network maintain a copy of the ledger. A blockchain network. A blockchain network is a technical infrastructure that provides ledger and smart contract services to applications. A token represents a set of a rule encoded in a smart contract. Each token belongs to a blockchain address. It's essentially a digital asset that is stored securely on the blockchain. NFT are non-fungible tokens, unique digital asset, the ownership of which is recorded on a blockchain. DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization, is an organization constructed by rule encoded as a computer program by the member. In short, they are member-owned communities without centralized leadership. IRL is an abbreviation of in real life something, which is the real world and outside the digital world of communication, gaming, and virtual reality. Wallet is a crypto wallet, a place where you can securely keep your crypto. Airdrop involves sending free coins and tokens to wallet addresses to promote awareness of a new currency. Now it's time to listen and learn. Hello, Boyd. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm excited as well.
Looking forward to learn from you. So today I'll be spending time getting to know you about Iomob, which is Internet of Mobility, and your thought on application of blockchain in mobility. And to begin with, I would like to ask you to share with our listener a little more about yourself. And also, are there any interesting facts about your career that are not on LinkedIn's?
Okay, so I'll make sure that anything I share, even if it's unknown, is not something that shouldn't be shared widely. So I think one thing, professionally that's interesting is, as I reflect on my career, a lot of people in the last few years have been talking about like 3 of the most recent in the history of humanity sort of technological disruptions. I've been thinking about my own role in each of them, and it's probably not obvious in my LinkedIn. People talk about the .com boom of Web 2.0. And interestingly, I was in that space in my PhD at the University of Colorado, and I was one of the first researchers studying the .coms as an academic in the entrepreneurship space. And I was curious at the time, if any of you recall, like the craziness around all these initial public offerings that these pets.com were doing with no traditional fundamentals. So I was trying to get under the hood and understand what factors of legitimacy influence evaluation of startups in the .com space when they went public. And I had like 3 categories. I looked at the founding team, I looked at the company itself, and I looked at the industry they were trying to disrupt. So in that boom of Web 2.0, I was a researcher observing and publishing research. The second boom is mobile. And in mobile, I actually had now made the transition from a pure academic to a hybrid academic entrepreneur. And one of my first companies was a company called Third Whale. And we were, to my knowledge, the very first company in the world building mobile apps for green consumers. So our core app was like a Yelp for green consumers for North America. So we acquired a database of sustainability and fair trade businesses around North America, and we created a mobile app. At that time, BlackBerry was still important. So we had a native app for BlackBerry, iOS, and Android. And this was like 2009, right when the app stores were released. I remember I did a pitch of my startup in Silicon Valley, and it was funny because my Ph.D. is in entrepreneurship and I studied Silicon Valley. My first time ever going there. And I was there as an entrepreneur and I was an academic pitching my startup out of 45 entrepreneurs. And we were chosen top 5, which got me all excited. And we rented a space in Silicon Valley and all the rest. The project didn't get that far. We did license the technology to a US company because we were based in Vancouver at the time. So that second boom, I was involved as an entrepreneur. All my entrepreneurial activity has been in the sustainability space and low carbon. And then the third huge wave, that's probably the biggest tsunami and wave we've seen in the history of humanity around technology and what it can do for us and society and the planet, is blockchain. Yeah. And again, I'm back in that one. So in 2016, I started writing a book about how blockchain could change the way we interact with the economic activities and startups, and how there's ways to coordinate in a different kind of way. I call it post-capitalist entrepreneurship. And as I was writing that book, I got invited by a venture fund to say, hey, Boyd, you should start a blockchain startup in the smart city space, because that's where I've done a lot of work. And long story, I found my co-founder, Joseph Sanjuas, in 2017, and we incorporated Iomob in 2018. We've gone through iterations, which we'll talk about now. But I think the summary point I'm trying to make is I've had kind of a front row seat, either as an observer or an actor, in 3 of the biggest technological transformations of our time. That's
amazing. I love the story you mentioned about 3 waves and moving from Web 2.0 to mobile and now blockchain. And I think every time the tide and wave is getting bigger and bigger and more powerful. So you are getting more trained to deal with these waves. In fact, in 2009 and 10, there was a company like Webvan, which was doing online delivery of stuff and all, which is quite popular these days, Instacart and all. I think that company was ahead of their time and couldn't able to sustain. But now we are seeing technologies, adoption has increased, people are more used to it, and things are getting better. And I'm pretty optimistic about blockchain. It's going to change things. Now, my second question is about your career. And I must say that I'm really inspired and loved your journey so far. You started your career as a change management consultant with Accenture, but quickly joined the academia and work in various positions in university in 3 different continents. And amazing, because you met students and entrepreneurs from 3 different worlds. You started your journey as an assistant professor of entrepreneurship and sustainability in Spain in 2001, and then moved to Canada, later to Argentina, later to Chile, and come back to Spain. And the most impressive thing is that you taught entrepreneurship and sustainability in all these places. So it's amazing, because people don't get chance to live that kind of a life. And finally, you mentioned you launched your Iomob in 2017 as a co-founder in Spain. So why this move in the career? I mean, when you are teaching and moving across the world, why did you decided to come into the arena? What motivated you to move from the role of a coach to player now?
The funny thing is, so when I first got my PhD in 2001, I was teaching sustainable entrepreneurship, as you said. I was one of the first professors in the world teaching that. Now it seems pretty normal, but this was 2001. We're talking 21 years ago, right? So I was teaching it, and I was excited about the topic, and my students were, but at some point I came to realize I didn't know what I was talking about. Like I started to feel bad for my students, because I was professing and teaching. I wasn't really a very lecture-oriented professor. I was always kind of focused on hands-on, learn by doing, and moving away from textbooks and like trying to be an entrepreneur, but I'd never tried to be one myself. And so I started in 2000. 2004, I think, was when I started playing around with trying to be an entrepreneur while I was an academic, which I don't recommend for anyone. That's really hard. And after like 3 years of being a founder, I realized I had gotten like a new PhD in the real world of what it means to actually start up a company. And then I really felt bad for all my prior students who had to listen to me explain from books what I knew about being an entrepreneur. So I went back and forth between being an entrepreneur and being an academic in sustainable entrepreneurship over really 2 decades almost. And then in 2015, I moved to Barcelona. I took the position of Dean of Research at a business school in Barcelona. And a couple years in, I got the entrepreneurship bug again. And at first, I tried doing both, realized I couldn't do both. And by 2018, I was like, okay, if I want Iomob to be successful, say goodbye to academics, which, for a lot of people is kind of scary. Because you have this stable sort of tenured income and security, and we had a nice house and all these things. And it was like, thankfully, my wife is really supportive, and she's also ambitious and believes in me and believes in taking risks in life. So she supported me all along, and here we are. And I haven't gone back to academics since 2018.
Which is great. So it means things are getting better and bigger. So
for sure.
In fact, this reminds me of my personal story. So when I quit my public sector job in 2010 and was about to get married, and I told my family that I'm quitting my government job and starting a company, and they were shocked. They were like, this guy has gone insane and doing these kind of stuff. But somewhere I think starting a business is the best way to learn about it. You can read books, you can join courses. But if you really want to enjoy entrepreneurship, just start something and you will learn.
Learn by doing.
Learn by doing.
I think, in recent times, we've seen a lot more cultural awareness and acceptance of taking the risk of being an entrepreneur. And it seems like every day, every year around the world is becoming more and more accepted or even encouraged. Like I remember when I was visiting Singapore, maybe 5-6 years ago, they were just in that transition where all the parents in Singapore always wanted their kids to go to the NUS and NTU top universities, like world-class universities, and they wanted them to go and work at HP and IBM and all these global companies that had a headquarter in Singapore. And it was like, what are you doing? Like leaving your great degree and then going to start a company that was like seen as a failure. But in the last several years, it's changed a lot there and really around the world. And now it's the cool thing to do. Even parents think it's cool that their children are becoming entrepreneurs. So that helps as well.
Oh yeah, there is much more acceptability in especially in the developing part of the world, because where there are a lot of these arranged marriages happen, and then you need to convince the bridegroom family that you are working. So when you say you are having your own company, sometimes they look like you're jobless. So so there is acceptability of that. Okay, thank you for sharing that backstory, and I fully agree. The lesson you share, it's learning by doing, otherwise you will never learn. Now, the story of Iomob, which is Internet of Mobility. I mean, I really love this term because it tried to capture, in one word, you try to capture the whole spirit of what you're trying to build. And you founded this company in 2017 with a vision of creating a global, interoperable, decentralized Internet of Mobility network. You started with a very global vision of decentralized world and all, but then you saw that the market is not ready at that time, and you pivoted to build the centralized application. And in 2022, again, you decided to shift Iomob toward decentralization and tokenization. So I really love the way you are converging, diverging, because you're seeing opportunity in that way. So I'm curious to know about the backstory of Iomob and which user and problem do Iomob serve.
Yeah, no, thanks. So start with Iomob and the name. As you said, it sort of tries to convey in one name a lot. And I come from the smart city space where IoT, Internet of Things, is huge. And the idea in IoT is that you can have an unlimited number of sensors and data collectivity across static or mobile devices or things in cities, and you can aggregate that data, have big data, and make better decisions that improves quality of life. So the idea is that you have IoT is about like capturing data from objects and things that allow for improved quality of life. And it could be a range of things in cities and regions that could generate data around air pollution, contamination, congestion, temperature, crime with video surveillance as an IoT component. And so we wanted to apply that same idea to mobility and say, look, there's 1.5 billion privately owned vehicles in the world. There are tens of thousands of shared mobility fleets in the world that each have their own walled garden apps. So you talk about a scooter company or a bike share company or a taxi company, and they all have their own apps, and they all have tons of thousands of vehicles. And then you have, of course, thousands of public transit services around the world. And they're all disconnected right now. And our idea was kind of like with IoT, that you can actually connect devices and have a mechanism to access all that data and make things more seamless and better for everyone. Our idea is the same thing with vehicles. Why not connect vehicles and services like parking and EV charging to an open network, IOM, Internet of Mobility, and then let different stakeholders access those services to offer to their users, their employees, or whatever. So that's been the fundamental vision of Iomob from day one, that any user of any interface connected to Iomob could discover, combine in multimodal routes, book or unlock, and pay for any mobility service or vehicle that's connected to the IOM. So that's been the vision from day one. As you said, we started with a decentralized vision. The world, the markets weren't ready for that. I have, people think this might sound good, but it's not always good. I have a tendency to be too early. Like when I talked about Third Whale, which we built green apps for green consumers in 2009, and that sounds cool, but take that forward a second. In 2009, when the smartphones, when Apple and Android and BlackBerry just started opening up for third-party developers. All right, ask yourselves these questions. How many people in 2009 had a smartphone? Okay. How many people had a smartphone and cared at all about green? All right. How many people had a smartphone, cared about green, discovered Iomob, and downloaded it? And it was like a minute number. We were too early. And being too early, I heard someone say not too long ago, being too early is just as bad as being too late. If you're too early, you can't make it. It won't work. It'll fail. It fails because you're too early, or fails because you're too late. Well, I have a tendency in my career as an entrepreneur, I think because I come from academics and I'm good at identifying trends and where the world is going, I can sort of see it before a lot of people do. And then I'm like, I want to act on it, but I'm too early. So Iomob as a decentralized global interoperable network, blockchain and token based in 2018, when we really incorporated, we're trying to make this get started, was just too early. Blockchain tech wasn't ready. So, and for those of your listeners who are familiar with layer 1 and layer 2 in blockchain, there's these ways now to basically enable data and transaction to flow through a layer on top of the core blockchain layers, because the core blockchain layers are too expensive and timely to process lots of transactions, like millions of transactions of mobility. So layer 2s are about solving that problem. They didn't even exist when we started Iomob, and there was no way we could ever scale Iomob decentralized in 2018. Similarly, investors in blockchain were not ready for investing in this sort of application layer, if you will, because they knew better than I realized that the underlying technology wasn't ready for this kind of use case. And, as you can imagine, and all your listeners are very well aware of the, what the legacy operators in transportation and some of the sort of bureaucratic resistance to innovation and change, right? Like imagine 2018 going to a transit agency and say, we're tokenizing this mobility platform and you need to stake tokens in the Iomob network to then have your services available. Like, forget it. And we tried. And it was like, man, this is not working. So we postponed it. And then we just started with a centralized approach, as you said. And we always, especially Josette, my co-founder, and I, we always wanted to come back to the decentralized vision because we were always convinced it was the superior way to deploy this at scale. You either have, if you will, the Uber example of like a walled garden and you own your services and and they're starting to offer other third-party services. Or you take a agnostic, decentralized approach and say, we're creating an open network of mobility services. We as Iomob have no skin in the game regarding which service a user chooses.
Yeah.
And therefore we surface through our journey planner the optimal journeys and vehicles for that user for that journey at that time, without any bias in our own regarding, well, we make more money if they choose our own branded vehicle, because we don't have it. So we always knew you either go Uber, raise billions of dollars, have a walled garden approach, or you go decentralized and agnostic. And so it was always like bugging us that we weren't doing it. And finally, at the end of 2021, so a few months ago, we had a coming together of all the executives, and Joseph and I made the pitch that it was time to go back to our roots, our real core vision. And we pretty much got unanimous buy-in from the executive team to say, okay, yeah, it's time, let's do it. So here we are.
That's great. And what problem exactly you're serving with Iomob, how you are trying to bring these mobility together?
Yeah, I mean, you just said it. I think, the fragmentation in the mobility space is really insane. Like, we talk about choice as a great thing for users. I mean, a good example, before COVID, there were 22 companies who had a license to operate scooter sharing services in Madrid. Okay,
22.
That's 22. Now, that's awesome from a choice perspective for a user, but what about from a user experience perspective? When you walk on a street, I want a scooter, I don't see one on the street. What do? Do I have to have downloaded all 22 scooter apps, open each one independently, find out which one is closest, onboard myself with my credit card and user profile? I mean, that's just insane. Now, what if I'm the same user in that city and I know I want to go from, I don't know, Park Retiro, that's a beautiful park in Madrid, to some part in the north of the city. And maybe the best way for me to do that is to actually take a scooter to the public transit service. And then the last part of my leg, I can take a moped or I can walk, or depends on the distance, right? Well, combining these disconnected walled garden services, whether it's public transit, one of the scooter companies, a bike share company, a moped company, and figuring that out myself. And you know what happens to users when they have to figure all that out? It's too much friction. So what do? Call an Uber. That will solve my problem because I know where I'm leaving and I know where I need to go, and Uber will just get me there. Well, I'm not saying Uber's evil. I'm not saying we should never take Uber or taxis, but maybe it's even better for the user if they knew to take the scooter to the train. Like, there's traffic and it's going to take you longer. Oh, and by the way, it's going to cost you 8 times as much money to go that distance in Uber than it would to do this other journey. So there could be really tangible reasons why, from a user perspective, this is awesome to have this multimodal experience, but until you make it easy for them to do it, they won't. So that's the challenge we're taking on. But there's another layer behind this, because we decided from day one we are going to be an enterprise solution. And that means we support public and private entities who want to offer this seamless mobility experience to their users for whatever purpose. So there's another pain point we're solving that's not just for the end user. And that is, imagine if you are a public transit agency, or you're a rail operator, or you're a travel agency, or you're an airline, and you want to support door-to-door mobility for your employees, your customers, whatever. There's tens of thousands of mobility fleets around the world. There's all these privately owned vehicles. There's all these public services. You're an airline. Yeah, you're good at optimizing butts and seats for your airline, but do you have any knowledge about how to go out, recruit, and integrate a bunch of disparate mobility services all around the globe, and then support journey planning for it and all the rest? So the extra pain we solve is for enterprise organizations, public and private, who have a motivation to offer this door-to-door experience, or maybe even less than that. We have clients who are thinking, what if we just add scooters to our airline app? So when you arrive to a new destination, we can offer you a destination mobility service package. We're going to offer you 100 minutes of scooter service for your 3-day trip to Paris. And guess what? Because Iomob integrates the range of service providers, it's not like a partnership with one operator.
Yeah.
Iomob could make that available where if there's 8 operators of micromobility in Paris, they're all available to you. With your 100-minute package, you can choose any of them, which you can optimize your for the one that's closest to you when you need it. So this is the pain that we're solving.
Thank you so much for putting in this way, because now it's became much more clear. And I agree with you. It's hard for agencies to deal with so many different players. So it's always good to find a player who can deal with everything, and they don't need to create standards or APIs or integrate business model with all different kind of player. And I think every year we are seeing 2 new modes are being added in public transit or in mobility sector. There will
Which
be
is
urban air
exciting, I
mobility,
think.
yeah, which is exciting too, but at the same time
Yeah,
challenging. Like for
exactly.
user, how many apps you need to download. And there was a study done which say that on an average people have 30 or 40 application, but they use only 3 or 4. Rest
Yeah.
all are just idle in your phone. So does it make sense to download so many apps, or you create these kind of integration? In fact, we discuss about this, that there will be in future aggregator. So for travel you will have one app, for food you will have one app, rather than having hundreds of apps. So thank
So
you,
one,
thank you.
one comment on that, I think is really interesting because our vision is aligned with that, but slightly different. So our view is that a lot of enterprise organizations that have millions of users of their existing app, whether it's an airline, a travel app, a taxi app, or whatever, a transit app, and there are reasons users use that app.
Yeah.
Our vision is to empower enterprise organizations to offer seamless, interoperable global mobility roaming to their user. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say you're someone who takes the train a lot, as a commuter, but also for other purposes. And you're loyal to the train company because you get loyalty points when you book through them, and you get free train tickets when you book through them. Now, if we can supercharge that train app so that you can use that to travel door to door on the train, that's powerful. But another step, which Iomob enables by default, is that any user of any interface connected to Iomob can discover, route, book, and pay any mobility service connected to Iomob anywhere in the world. So you downloaded this app in Toronto for your Via Rail app because you use it a lot. If Via Rail authorizes this, the user could cross into the US, roam around the US, engage in rail and scooter services and taxi services that don't exist in Canada, that don't exist in the Via Rail territory, but you could do all that inside the Via Rail app. And if Via Rail wants you to, you can also get loyalty points for that, because maybe they want to learn more about their customers and how they travel when they're in and outs for a range of reasons. So what I'm saying is, we don't believe at Iomob there's going to be, I mean, that's Uber's play. We don't believe that there's one app that people will use to travel the world. We believe, for a bunch of reasons, there will continue to be fragmentation of transport apps. Every transit agency wants their own app, right? Every rail operator wants their own app. Every airline wants their own app. And there's arguments they all should have their own app. Well, if they all have their own app, why can't they all be supercharged by a global mobility network so they can connect to our network and turn on this capability so that whatever app you prefer, because you're a rail customer, an airline customer, a delivery service customer, and they give you benefits you like and you use it a lot, you can turn any app into a seamless global mobility roaming app powered by Iomob. So that means over time, our vision is, there could be thousands of apps around the world that all allow the user, for whatever reason that makes sense for the user and the enterprise, to travel freely around the world without having to download a new app every time they travel somewhere else.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's basically giving people more localized and personalized service. At the same time, they don't need to jump from one app to another. So they use whatever they're using. But in the back end, you make changes. So on the front end, they don't see all these things changing. But on the back end, you can power the app, you can integrate those options. So on the front end, if they're using like VRL apps, so they will keep using VRL, but they can access to many more services when they move out of Canada, when they go in state or go in Europe, but they can still use that app. So at that time, they don't need to change their payment method. They don't need to change their, like you said, mobility
Exactly.
points and all. So you keep running. That's powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. That's why I ask and spend a little more time on this, because it's important to understand what Iomob is trying to solve and what is the future of. I really love what you said, IoT and Iomob. So I think in future, everybody will be using this term as a Xerox. So for copy, we
I
use
hope
Xerox.
so.
So
If you or your listeners are remember this, there used to be a big campaign from Intel called Intel Inside, and it was their effort to sort of differentiate computers built with an Intel chip as there were more AMD and some of the other competitors came to the market. And
yeah,
the average user buying a computer had no idea which computer was better and what Intel did. And so they try to really make it stand out that if you have an Intel Inside, that it's a better computer.
yeah.
So our vision is the IOM Inside, that
Okay.
over time, thousands of different organizations for different reasons will plug mobility into their app. And the apps that have plugged mobility from Iomob in their app have these advantages for the user, that global mobility roaming, the one user ID, as you said, and many other benefits. So yeah, that's the direction we're going.
Great. Looking forward to that and wish you good luck in your journey. So
Thanks.
now I want to discuss about blockchain and crypto, which are the hot buzzword, like you mentioned in technology right now. Everybody's talking about blockchain, Web3, crypto. So technology is not new. Bitcoin was launched in 2009 and became more mainstream during pandemic. And I'm curious to know what has changed now, like why in last 2 years things suddenly changed and it became more mainstream. And why do you think there is no going back? Sometime what happened, we see a lot of these trends coming in like dot-com boom, but then suddenly they disappear. Personally, I'm became very curious about blockchain and crypto while doing some research about blockchain gaming. I never thought the blockchain can be used in gaming, but when I learn about it, I blown away by the use of technology. But I'm curious to learn from you is like, how do you see that the blockchain and this distributed ledger technology will change the mobility sector?
Yeah. So definitely there's no going back. Some people say Web 1 was about read. Web 2 was read and write. So you could
Yeah,
like post blogs and stuff. Web 3 is read, write, and own. And even if you go back to the gaming example you just brought up, like one of the disruptive things blockchain has done to gaming, and I'm not a gamer, but it's really curious, is, the whole NFT thing, and that you can own an avatar, but you can own things the avatar possesses.
yeah,
Well, that in itself doesn't sound that exciting, but when you start thinking about the ripple effects, instead of like my daughter who uses Roblox and she buys stuff all the time, she's like a monthly subscription, but she doesn't own any of those things. If she starts another game in the metaverse or in another blockchain, she can't bring that stuff with her. If those things appreciate in value somehow because there's more demand for them, she doesn't get any benefit of that value. Whereas in blockchain gaming, you own these things, they become yours, and you get to actually benefit from the value appreciation. And you also get to take them with you
yeah.
to other platforms. And that's totally new. And so when you start thinking more broadly about why is blockchain starting to become so disruptive to so many industries, it's changing the way we govern our economic systems. It's changing the way we distribute ownership of those systems. And, if you have the chance to be a co-owner of something and an appreciation of the value accrues to you as a contributor of value, if you get a chance to influence how the ecosystem is developed because you are part of a decentralized autonomous organization for that ecosystem and you get to vote with your tokens or whatever, it's super empowering. I mean, going to another example that I love is like what we're starting to see in art and music, where like, people like make fun of NFTs as just this like, glorified graphic files.
Yeah.
But there's some really fundamental differences around NFTs for an artist, right? Like the most fundamental goes back to this read, write, and own thing. Like if I'm an artist and I contribute an NFT to a OpenSea marketplace, and I can put into the sale process that I receive 10% of royalties every time it's sold again.
Yeah.
So the artist can sell it once, yeah. But as we can think about in the history of man and women, very few artists have been really respected and valued in their time. And historically, their value really accrues after they're gone.
Yeah.
Or at least over time, and they built much more of a brand and they're more well known, right? Like the very first Banksy, when it first came out, no one knew who he was, and it was probably worthless to most people. That's not true anymore. So the point being, if you can bake in these sort of royalties indefinitely, it could be empowering for the artist. So it's the same kind of thing across every industry. Now let's talk about mobility and why we believe blockchain is appropriate in mobility right now. So going back to a point we discussed earlier around the walled garden model versus the sort of decentralized agnostic model is, if you were, let's say, a scooter company in Toronto, and I came to you as some major taxi company with an app with tens of millions of users, and we have our own scooter service as well.
Yeah.
But we want to add your scooters in. We're a Web2 walled garden company. How comfortable are you connecting your scooters to my app? I have tens of millions of users. That's great. We can optimize your fleet utility by giving you exposure to our users. Okay, that sounds good so far. All right. We're doing an open introductory offer. We're only going to charge 2% of every transaction we generate. Oh, wow, that sounds great too.
Yeah.
Okay, so far so good. All right. Now, if I'm that operator, what protection do you have as a small scooter operator startup that I won't increase the transaction fees later after you've kind of gotten sucked into my service because we're driving all this revenue, and now you don't want to disconnect your service because you got all these users using it that way. So what protection do you have? Zero is one answer. And what if I am this big taxi company and I have tens of millions of users? What if I didn't even have a scooter service yet?
Yeah.
But I learned from all the data I'm getting from your scooters booked through my app. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's a great business here. I'm going to come in and undercut them. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm not just going to like increase the cost. I'm just going to remove them from my network. I don't need them anymore because I'm going to replace them with my own. So our vision is the only way this works at scale is decentralized, where there's no single monopoly entity that can do this, that can remove your right to operate or can impose extractive fees on you. So underlying everything is that. There's another element here which goes to this point of co-ownership, which is that as a scooter operator in Toronto, you could get tokens, you could earn tokens in Iomob, and that allows you to have governance influence over decisions that are made in the Iomob ecosystem that could benefit your business and the ecosystem. So, going back to like a taxi service, any ride hail operator, Lyft or Uber and all the rest, we've all heard the stories that they sometimes have sort of extractive fees on users, on drivers and on users. We could talk about both surge pricing and what that does. But on drivers, for example, they don't have a voice in the fees they pay. And if Uber decides to remove them for whatever reason, they can. They can charge a higher fee, and Uber can do that. Uber can pull them off the platform. What if, and this isn't to pull out Uber because this could happen from any of these companies, right?
Yeah.
Bolt, Uber, Lyft. What if they make an investment in autonomous vehicles, as they all are looking to do, and some of the drivers go on strike?
Yeah.
Well, they're not organized labor. And in many markets, Uber could just, or Lyft or Bolt or Kareem or whoever could just like let them go. They're gone. In fact, most of them aren't even employees because by law in many markets, they're not even employees or contractors, so they can just let them go whenever they want. So the point is, the Web2 economy has really been extracted and has exacerbated income inequality for the participants of these ecosystems. And what decentralized approaches enable is more read, write, and own, so that the people who contribute to the value creation of the ecosystem have influence over governance and ownership over the ecosystem. And that can be fundamentally different.
No, that's a great point. You mentioned about the ownership, and in fact, we will be discussing some of these points in more detail. But I agree with you. That's a worry with a lot of these public transport agencies is what will happen if I share my network and open up my network with other players. My passenger will go away, or I will lose control over them and all. But I think with decentralized technology, they can continue to have control over their data, and they share what is required, so nobody need to fear, because it's done in a transparent way, it's done in an open way, so you don't need to worry what's happening in the back end, because everything is open to all the player in the front, and nobody can take away data from one to another for their advantage or disadvantage. So I agree with you. It will, I think, with the decentralized world or blockchain, it will try to bring more transparency into the system and
Mhm.
reduce complexity in the front end. So there'll be more complexity in the back end, but in the front end, it will be easier for everybody, for user, for operator, for player, to work seamlessly. In the back end, they can manage stuff.
Agreed.
Great. Now I want to discuss about MaaS, because that's what you are looking to build. You are looking to build this mobility as a service application with global roaming and all. To be honest, we haven't seen any major success in this area till now, both from adoption side as well as funding side. Total funding in MaaS application, including big one like Move It, is less than $200 million. And similarly, there are not even 5 applications that can be labeled as a true MaaS. Most of them are journey planner and all. They haven't able to kind of break that, like the wall you mentioned. They haven't able to do that to bring everything together. So recently I was talking with a MaaS expert. He said you can't even count 5 app which has all the feature, the payment and integration and all. Why are you more optimistic about this decentralized MaaS? Like, why you feel that's the future and that's where the world will come together?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we haven't seen it scale yet. I'd say, it's also worth recognizing that we're in the early days of a transformation of an industry, right? And
Yeah.
it's an industry that has a history of not being super innovative, especially when you bring the public sector in. And you're trying to encourage collaboration across an ecosystem who's distrustful of each other. Private operators don't want to share their data with public operators. Public operators don't like private ones because they feel like they're taking users away from more sustainable shared public transit systems. Private operators don't trust their other private operators because they compete and they don't want to be on the same platform. I mean, there's a bunch of friction here that has to be resolved. You have all this fragmentation, as we've discussed already, which means
Yeah.
to make a seamless experience across a growing number of modes, as you already talked about. I mean, soon we'll have urban air mobility in places, whether we think we should or not. Scooters, bikes, mopeds, car sharing, peer-to-peer, B2C, dynamic DRT systems.
Yeah.
You have traditional public transit. Then you add in parking and EV charging, and you have car leasing, and you have all these different things that are happening that are all different ways of thinking about new mobility and legacy mobility and how they seamlessly integrate. So there's so many complexities around this. Technologically, I don't feel, having been doing this for 4 years now, I don't think the technology is the biggest barrier to making MaaS scale. I think it's more resistance from different stakeholders. It's buy-in from them. It is a bit on user experience, right? Because you got to get that right to actually make it worth the while of users.
Yeah.
I will also say, this is our opinion, and it's why we did our company this way from the beginning. Doing a B2C company on a global scale takes billions of dollars. Like a year ago, I looked at the data on Uber, and I think they spend something like $2 billion a year on user acquisition.
Yep.
So if you're trying to build a MaaS company at global scale as a B2C play, you have to deal with all these challenges I just brought up around the fragmented ecosystem and distrust and all the rest. And then you have to find a way to attract billions, not the millions you already named in the start of this question, in terms of how much money's flowed into the space yet, to actually acquire customers and get them to change their behavior towards a seamless multimodal app. So what we decided is, as I've discussed earlier, but I didn't address this point of it, that we were going to go after the enterprise market that already has millions of users of an app. And what we're going to do is supercharge their app or their web or their kiosk with a middleware solution that can be plugged into their existing offering, whether they're an airline, a travel agency, a transit agency, a taxi service who wants to offer multimodal, doesn't matter. Our vision is the way to make this scale is to not impose a B2C walled garden MaaS vision, but instead an open agnostic network of mobility services that enterprise customers can pull on for whatever reason. Go back to an example I gave earlier. We're having discussions with airlines who are interested in like offering a 100-minute package of micromobility in your destination. Yeah. If you book your plane, and in fact, some of them are looking at the idea of offering it as like a free thing. If you book your flight through our web or mobile, we will offer you 50 free minutes of micromobility in your destination. Why would they do that? Well, right now, airlines pay healthy fees of commissions to travel agencies. And when you book through a travel agency, the airline doesn't get to know you as a user. Yeah. And they don't get to monetize more services on top either. How can they sell you booking a rental or a hotel if they don't even know who you are? Guess who's monetizing that? The travel agency, the intermediary. So there are reasons why an airline might say, you know what, we're going to offer 50 free minutes of micromobility. All right, so why am I giving this example is airlines have millions of customers. Yeah. Airlines have their own use cases. And therefore, is what I just described, 50 minutes of free micromobility, how you and your listeners just define MaaS? Definitely not. MaaS is seamless multimodal mobility with public transit at its core that you can discover, outbook, and pay the services that are inside it. And I support MaaS. I'm not opposed to MaaS. We're very active in MaaS. My point being, part of the reason MaaS hasn't scaled is there's this very black and white view of what is and isn't MaaS. And it creates problems because that's not what every user wants or every enterprise who might benefit from some of these same kinds of technologies expect or want for their user base. So I think the industry needs to be more agnostic and more flexible about how different customers, enterprise will use this or end users will use it. I'll give another example. Brightline Trains is a new commercial deployment of Iomobs in the States. They're owned by SoftBank. They're a really interesting private rail operator, amazing rail experience. And they want to offer this seamless mobility for their users for a bunch of reasons. But they also noticed, they did research and discovered 40% of all their bookings happen from people who have a car and want to drive and park. Well, tell me a public transit agency who's totally opposed to supporting park and ride. I mean, that's a very valid use case. But in the MaaS industry, we have this dichotomous thing that cars are evil and you can't have private cars in a MaaS deployment because that's not what MaaS is for. MaaS is supposed to be about getting everyone out of cars and into multimodal. Well, I'm all for that too, but you can't like impose your values on everybody and assume they're just gonna on their own change. Some people, for whatever reason, want to drive their car to a train station. Well, that's way better than them driving their car from door to door. They're driving to a train station, then they're taking sustainable mobility. So Iomob incorporates the use of a private car in multimodal door-to-door journeys. So with Brightline, you could take your car. We will tell you how much it would cost to park. You can pay for parking in advance. You park at the station, you take the train, you book that in advance, and maybe you didn't book your last mile yet because you think you're going to do micromobility and you don't know which service is available at the time you're going to get to the train station. So you pull out the app and you can dynamically book your last mile scooter, and you can do that whole thing in a seamless experience. My point being, we can't impose a single definition and a binary view of what is and isn't MaaS, and then assume and then challenge why MaaS is not succeeding at scale. If that's what we define as MaaS, it isn't succeeding at scale because it's too inflexible and is imposing too many value assertions on users and assuming they'll change everything they do. And what we need to do is meet users where they are and make it easier for them to engage in modal shift, but in ways that accommodate what they want, not what we want them to do.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing point you mentioned about changing behavior. and it's not easy task, and you cannot force people to change their behavior. What you need to do is you can nudge them, but you need to adjust and adopt to what people are looking. In fact, one MaaS application in Australia, they have included the fuel station information within the application, because they feel like those who are using public transport also own cars, so they want to know where I can find cheaper gas. So it's their option. And to be honest, a lot of MaaS application now incorporating the parking feature, and I think it's must. You cannot just tell people not to use it, but you can encourage them not to use more. You can encourage them to use less. Thanks for sharing that point, Boyd. I agree with you. It's we need to be much more flexible, and today's world, we cannot be rigid and inflexible, saying, okay, if you are not doing this, you're out. If you're doing this, you're in, because then you are creating a very black and white world. And I don't think we are living in a black and white world. We are living in a much more lively world. So now, in fact, my next question is follow up to what we just discussed. So we are seeing, and like you mentioned, we are seeing a lot of emergence of white label MaaS application, which are offering API and SDK to other player, which is make it much easier for people to create and integrate services. In fact, Iomob, I think you have a largest API links. You are providing 7,000 MSP, which is mobility service provider, across 8 modes in different parts of the world. What is MSP? So I want to understand, what do you define as MSP, and what will be the role of these MSP when these deployment will happen? How these MSP will keep working? You gave some example about how the different scooter companies and then can work together. But when you are including 7,000 MSP, how they will work together with each other?
Yeah, to be clear, we have probably even more than that, but a lot of those 7,000, for example, are like part of aggregated APIs we have. So like we work with taxi aggregators that aggregate thousands of fleets. So each one is technically an MSP, a mobility service provider. So if they're a taxi fleet in Berlin, and they've been aggregated by a taxi aggregator and we've integrated them, then they're part of our ecosystem, our network. But it doesn't mean that we have independently integrated 7,000 of those. It's part of a global network of suppliers. Some are direct, like we have Bolt and Tier and Voy and some of these other big players, especially in Europe, that are directly integrated into the network. But many of the others, especially in the taxi space, are part of an aggregated API that we've received from taxi aggregators. There's a bunch of them, like Carhu and the Good Seat and many others around the world, and we've got several of them. So for us, a mobility service provider is an entity that has vehicles or potentially services, like parking can be an MSP, a mobility service provider as well. So an MSP is a service provider within the mobility space that can deliver us an API that allows us to integrate them into our network so that they can be discovered, routed, booked, and paid for by any user of any interface connected to Iomob. So what's in it for MSPs to connect to Iomob is something we talked about before. It's about optimizing fleet utility. And so think about that, like if you're a small taxi operator, I mean, there's some really cool like underlying impacts of this example I'm about to give. Imagine Sue has a fleet of 10 taxis in Barcelona. Okay. You fly to Barcelona from Toronto. You pull out what app when you get to Barcelona, and whatever app you pull out, what are the probability you would ever discover Sue's taxis? Now, what if whether Sue has an app or not is a different question. Even if she did, you're never going to find it and download it and onboard it for a 3-day trip in Barcelona. It would be like, who would do that? But realistically, you're not going to discover it. Now, imagine Sue's taxis are plugged into the network of Iomob, and you're using any app via rail. Let's go back to that example. And you get on a plane to Barcelona, and because our technology is interoperable by default, you take your via rail, you get to Barcelona airport. It says, welcome to Barcelona. Did you know we have 18 mobility services at your disposal in Barcelona? You're like, wow, how does Via Rail do that? Well, Via Rail is a Canadian rail operator. Well, how would they even pull that off? Well, they didn't. Iomob did for other reasons, but all our customers get the benefit. So if Sue's taxis are in Iomob, and you're now, I don't know, at the stadium, the Barca stadium, and you're going to leave and you're looking for a taxi, and there are none because it's crazy after a game. It's 100,000, the stadium seats 100,000 people.
Yeah.
What if Sue has a taxi available 2 blocks from you? Uber or Cabify, Uber's big competitor in Spain, has the nearest one 20 minutes from you.
Yeah.
All right. Odds are you have Uber on your phone and you pull out Uber and you're like, oh, well, 20 minutes, I might as well. I don't have a choice. What if the Via Rail app exposed for you that Sue has a taxi 2 blocks from you? What did we just do? We just created inclusive economic opportunity for Sue and her drivers that they wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise, because they could never afford to spend the money to try to acquire you as a user when you're coming for 3 days. That's insanity.
Yeah.
It's not going to. Okay, so that's one thing. Secondly, we just optimized the transportation ecosystem in Barcelona, because instead of you calling an Uber that's 20 minutes away and going to add the congestion on their journey, you optimized your journey for a vehicle that's near you, so there's no congestion contribution. And thirdly, we saved you 18 minutes. Instead of waiting 20 minutes for the Uber, you're waiting 2 minutes for Sue's taxi. So there's all these ripple effects of benefits by creating a seamless, open, agnostic mobility ecosystem. I would even argue for Uber, it was better for Uber that you took Sue's taxi. And why is that? Because Uber doesn't monetize much of the journey that driver's taking by himself, getting to you 20 minutes away. And probably 30 seconds later, somebody else is going to call an Uber when Uber is the best vehicle for that user. So it's just better for everyone. And that's the task we're tackling at scale.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of blockchain advocates talk about this, and I also believe in that, is real democracy and level playing field for everybody. So making everybody equal in the nodes and giving everybody equal opportunity, like you mentioned about this example. And I love your example because it's a perfect way to explain what technology should do rather than creating these monopolies, or in fact, these monopolies are also bad. Like you mentioned, the driver is not monetizing his trip. He's trying 20 minutes empty ride, because he will reach there. He'll not feel happy because he's not getting for those 20 minutes. In fact, he can stay there and probably get a ride in next 30 seconds, which will be much more economical for him. So thanks for putting that example. And I agree with you. It's much better now to use these technology to giving equal opportunity to everybody in the market. Now, my next question is, you mentioned about these app and super apps. So recently there was a news by Uber that they are going to integrate many more options in their app. So train tickets, public transport, flights, hotel, food, etc. So they will become like a super app. We already know there are super apps in Asia, like Grab and Gojek and all. Do you think these super app as a threat or opportunity for public transport as well as for Iomob? Like, do you think they will control the market, or they will actually help other players in the market?
I think it depends on the super app and the ambitions behind the company that's driving it. I think it's a little risky for transportation operators like Uber in terms of the potential they have, and we've seen that with data, to go reverse on the modal shift we're aspiring to and get more people to take taxis for 3 minutes. I think I've seen some data not too long ago that in the US, something like the average Uber trip was like less than 3 miles. And, that's within range of almost all kinds of shared mobility services, whether it's public transit or whether it's scooters or mopeds or many other things that are much greener options for users and less impact on the congestion and contamination and the rest. Whereas I think for and part of the reason I say it's a little more risky when it's a transportation operator is that they are, by default, if they're Web 2, venture backed, they're profit seeking by nature, and that's fine. That's what they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
So if they make more profit on you taking an Uber than taking a train, and if they get more and more people like you and me to use their app instead of the transit app, and they present journey plans for me that are biased for their profit, not for the benefit of the ecosystem or the planet or whatever, it could be that over time they actually facilitate more reverse modal shift because they incentivize and encourage you as they suck you into their app to use their app for more and more things, and you're less likely to actually choose the more sustainable and shared mobility option because it's not in their best interest that you do. So I think that's a risk with them. Whereas with other types of super apps where they don't have skin in the game directly because they don't operate a transport service directly, or they don't offer competing ones, like an intercity rail company like Via Rail or Amtrak or Brightline, our client, if they want to add first and last mile services and the rest, I see less risk of that type of super app being a challenge to our objectives as a society and as transit agencies. It's more likely it'll get more people to take transit and shared mobility if those are the types of super apps, or super apps like, again, of delivery services or fintech companies or a range of other companies who might want to offer mobility as an extra service. If they don't have a direct skin in the game to convince you to do modal shift to something that's not maybe the most desirable, then I think that can be a good outcome. And that ties into Iomob in the sense that in terms of, do we see what Uber is doing as a threat or an opportunity? We see it as a direct opportunity for at least two reasons. One is our clients are trying to create their own type of super app. And one of the reasons they want to is they want to better know their customers and find ways to monetize them more and offer them a better service. And when they see Uber doing that, they're like, oh, that's a threat to us. If we want to own the user and they want to own the user and they're starting to sell my services, my rail service on their app, how am I going to get to know my customer and better offer them better service? I'm not going to. So it's encouraging them to come to Iomob to say, how can we be competitive with this kind of offering from Uber? So that's one thing. And I think, there's actually several others, but I'll leave it at that so that we can move on to the other questions.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. And I think this actually remind me of example of Amazon. So Amazon has control over their stores. So they are using third-party data to actually promote Amazon basic product and all. So you're right.
Yeah.
If you're a seller as well as a platform, there is kind of a very thin boundary where you can play both the roles. So I agree with you, and we need to see.
Yeah, sorry, one quick comment about this. When you also pose a question from the perspective of a transit agency. One thing I think is interesting is most transit agencies, there's a big black box around multimodal. What I mean by that is if they don't offer MaaS-like experiences, they have often zero knowledge about what modes people are taking to go to and from public transit stations. Often zero.
Yeah.
Unless they do surveys or something, and even those aren't very trustworthy and they're not the most efficient way to figure that out. And this goes even back to the question of profitability. So if you measure MaaS, if you think of MaaS the more classical way, like a public transit driven multimodal system, one of the reasons to do that has nothing to do with profitability, which of course in the public transit system is rarely a big motivation anyway. It's to better understand the transportation ecosystem and to improve it. So if we discover through having our own transit MaaS-like experience that 35% of all journeys on our metro are actually combined with a first and last mile micromobility service, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And what if we discover that, 18% of users are doing this insane journey to get to certain transit hubs because there's clearly not enough provision of alternative ways to solve first and last mile. Maybe we should even encourage or subsidize. I know this sounds crazy, but I don't think it is. subsidize private shared mobility services to come and fill the gap so we can have more sustainable journeys, get more people to choose transit as part of their core journey because they don't have to take the car the whole way because we've solved a big pain on their first mile. And I do think what's coming, and I bet most of your listeners are well aware of this point, but account-based ticketing models with fare capping, where a user under certain conditions could be subsidized, their first and last mile in private shared mobility services could be subsidized. In Barcelona, last I knew, the city spends something like 3,000 euros a year per bike in their public bike share system. Well, that's a lot of money. And what if some of that money they spend on public bike share could also be offered to subsidize private shared mobility services? For example, in areas where bike share is not the best service or doesn't exist or whatever, and under a fare capping system with ABT, you could make that happen. All these kinds of use cases for a transit agency powered with a MaaS type experience have nothing to do with profitability, but they have a whole lot to do with improving the functioning of the transport ecosystem and enabling more inclusive mobility for everyone. So I think there's a lot to uncover here.
Yeah, no, I think what the point you mentioned, I know a couple of agencies which are doing that in Europe, especially, that they are combining the last mile and they are actually subsidizing the last mile trips and tying up with these private player and providing that system. So basically, with this model of not only spending money on maintaining a huge infrastructure, you're partnering and sharing revenue with others and making it's more inclusive as well as more sustainable. And I think that's what more important is. You cannot spend billions of dollars, especially after COVID, when the budgets are low and you have to be innovative and all. Thanks, Boyd. I really enjoyed what you're mentioning and the examples you're giving, because that's giving me a real life perspective rather than thinking just from the theory point of view. So I love how you're putting your theories into practice. And now I want you to share something which is a difficult topic for a lot of people because it's very new. It's called DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, because especially in public transit world, I don't know many people are aware about what DAO is and how it works and all, but it's becoming more and more popular, and it's also gaining a lot of traction because you see as an opportunity that all stakeholder has stay in the organization. So like you mentioned, the user can tell or the driver can tell whether we want more commission or we want less commission and how much is that. So can you share a little more about what DAO is in simple word, because I know you can put things in a very easy way. And what do you think is the potential of DAO in mobility sector? Do you think DAO will be important for decentralized MaaS?
Yeah, no, I love this question. And I think this might be the first time or one of the first times anyone in a podcast will have ever asked that question or heard an answer to it. DAOs and mobility have not really been discussed in public forums yet. Same with NFTs, which we might talk about, and the metaverse, which we might talk about as well. So there's a lot of fun places we might go. But on the DAO, so a decentralized autonomous organization is basically an entity. It's like a co-op with a smart contract supporting it, in the sense that a DAO is basically owned and governed by the members. And in this case, to be a member of a DAO, you normally have to have a token. And the token is usually a native token to that ecosystem. So Iomob will have our own token called the IOM token, Internet of Mobility token. So any user, anybody who's acquired tokens will have the right to vote and govern and co-own the IOM ecosystem. Now, you can go into much more depth than we probably want to today on, for example, voting mechanisms. So in the DAO world, there's a lot of debate around, should it be one token, one vote, which is called token weighted voting, or should there be another model? And the reason people are wondering about that so much lately is because the one token, one vote feels a little bit too much to many people like the current economic system, which is flawed because it biases the whales. Whales in blockchain are those who have very large stakes in a project. So it biases towards them, because if you do one token, one vote, and you have 100,000 tokens and most people have no more than 10, then clearly you're going to dominate the governance and the voting and the ownership of this ecosystem. So there are models emerging to sort of change the way votes, eligibility for voting. There's things called quadratic voting and other things. I won't go into detail on this, but your listeners might want us to look it up more, because there are ways to make it more inclusive and democratized at the ownership level. But basically, a DAO is an entity that governs the economy and the token and the distribution of that token of an ecosystem. So in the case of Iomob, and this is really fascinating, I think, we will have, by the end of this year, a DAO that manages 50% of our token allocation, which means we're removing our ability to dictate how the ecosystem evolves and what are the next elements of our roadmap. And we're saying, you know what, we're going to believe in the community, that collectively the community will come up with better ways of solving challenges than we will. I'll give a real quick example of how this could be reality.
Yeah.
We have one investor we've been talking to for a long time who's really interested, but he's like, you know what I don't like? That you haven't solved what happens around incentivizing different actors for journeys booked when the journey crosses jurisdictions, and there could be more than one way to share revenue or token incentives across those jurisdictions. I literally just told this investor a couple of days ago, I hope he doesn't listen to this podcast, but I said, you know what, we've decided you're not the right investor for us right now. And the reason I said he's not the right investor for us is he wants us to pre-bake all those decisions in right now, and we don't. Not because we're incapable of coming up with a decision that is how should revenue share happen across jurisdictions, but because we don't think we should. We think it should be the token holders, which will be ecosystem actors who have skin in the game and have their own viewpoints on this, and we'll let the community make the best decision for how this should happen rather than us impose it. And that's what a DAO is supposed to be for. It's that it's co-owned by the members who have influence over governance, who can make recommendations for how to improve the system, and who can influence the system in very important ways. That's what a DAO is for. And one other, like, because your second question was, and its role in mobility. Okay, so how is Iomob going to do it? And we, to our knowledge, are the first project of any kind, not just in mobility, of any kind in the world to design our ecosystem this way, which is Iomob's going to have a DAO. I'm putting it up at the top, but maybe it really should be underneath. There's going to be an IOM DAO that governs the global ecosystem that will be made up of global token holders of the IOM token. And then we're going to have an auction. There'll be auctions for DAOs. You could call them sub-DAOs, territorially constrained sub-DAOs. So a city like Toronto might have its own DAO. What does that mean? Is that we're further delegating governance and ownership of the ecosystem to local and regional actors who are way better adept than we are to govern that system, to animate that system with local and regional suppliers, to engage the local community. And what this will actually be is like a global network eventually of thousands of DAOs, where each sub-DAO has an influence on the global Internet of Mobility DAO. But has almost exclusive governance over their local DAO. When I say almost exclusive, is there still a role for the IOM global ecosystem? I'll give you a quick example. Imagine we have a DAO, there's a DAO auction, and your organization wins the right to govern the local Toronto IOM ecosystem. And you decide you're going to open it up to other stakeholders, and there's some other people who also now own your own token. So you can, as a DAO, as a sub-DAO, you can have your own token, which allows you to do nudging. Maybe you want to use your token to encourage end users in your community to choose more sustainable stuff. Okay, all great. But what if you delegated inside your DAO some power to an entity that is starting to do things that are unacceptable to the global internet of mobility community. I don't know. They've changed, they've managed to distort everything, and they're now getting people to take urban air taxis everywhere, and they've eliminated scooters from visibility in the platform. So you kind of need to take their urban air taxi, because like the only thing that you can use in this system. Well, there's a mechanism that we've designed that the IOM token holders can choose to basically withdraw your rights to operate your local DAO, would basically kill the DAO, and then have a new auction for someone else to operate it, because it's not being operated consistent with the values and expectations of the global ecosystem. So that's a super cool concept we've never seen anyone do, which is that there's a global DAO, and then there will be all these sub DAOs all around the world. And we designed it that way specifically because we spent 4 years engaging with the global transportation community and realizing that imposing a top-down governance model, even though it's decentralized and the world could own the tokens and all the rest. I live in Barcelona. Yeah, I'm from the States. I've lived in Canada, as you said. I've lived in lots of places. So what that I'm CEO of Iomob? I'm in Barcelona. What do I know about the transportation ecosystem in Toronto, and who the best actors are to join and govern the local system, and what the latest regulations are, and how you might want to nudge behavior in Toronto that could be different than in Barcelona. So that's how we came up with this model, is that for this to work at scale, we need a decentralized governance to territories where, because we all know transportation is this kind of hybrid global local kind of thing, right? There are times when you cross jurisdictions, and there are many times, what is it, 90% of most journeys don't cross a jurisdiction, they're local. So we're trying to make the best of global and local and decentralization and DAOs.
Well, thank you for sharing. Like you said, it's a very new topic, and people are still figuring out how to use it. And I love what you mentioned about creating a global entity, but at the same time giving power to the local jurisdiction, because then they can decide what is good for them. And that's a problem I see with the more globalized companies, because they take decision from one place, whereas the reality in the local city or local place is very different. So probably you have a different discount mechanism, probably you have a different fee structure. You have, like, recently somebody tweet Elon Musk saying you can charge $3 per month in developed countries, but for Twitter, but for developing country, that's too much. And he said, yeah, it has to be different. It should be on the paying capacity of that local region and all. And I think with these DAO, you actually can do that, which is not possible in a centralized model, much more decentralized way and all. So thanks for sharing that. And now you mentioned, like, we are going deeper into some of these interesting topic, Web3, Metaverse, and NFT. And what I love is because you are not only sharing what these are, but you are actually doing some work in these technology. And I would be very curious to learn some of the practical life example. So my first question is, what is Web3? You briefly mentioned about it's read, write, and own. But I want to go a little more deeper into it, because Web 1 usually, we say it's basically user of early web consumer information, primarily in a passive way. Like you said, just read, don't do anything, just read. And Web 2, we allow people to create, we allow people to interact with content like social media and all. But in Web 3, the main concept is you allow people to get back the control, like own your stuff. So own your material, own your paintings, own your design and all. So how will it affect the transit sector, if at all? Because a lot of people don't know what is the difference of Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. So how does Web 3 is going to impact the transit sector? And why you think Web 3 will be an important area for mobility player as well as for rider? Can rider own their data and monetize it? Like how you see Web 3 will change the whole equation and game?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're so early. We're really fairly early in blockchain Web 3 as a society, and we're only really recently, over the last couple of years, starting to see applied use cases of blockchain to industries and and ways that might actually improve people's lives. Because, you know, the early use cases have been these layer 1 and layer 2 blockchains, and they've been worth a lot of money. But they're like core building blocks for the later application layers that people will interact with. Then you started seeing decentralized finance, DeFi, be the big thing. And that's still, for a lot of people, very esoteric. It's like, you know, trading models and liquidity pools and things that the average user doesn't ever experience.
Yeah.
And then we saw the boom of NFTs, and the NFTs is probably the first sort of mainstream use case of blockchain technology, in the sense that you're seeing more people come into blockchain who never were in it before, who don't know what DeFi is and don't know what layer 1 and 2 is, but they know what an ape looks like and this cool thing that I can own it, and it's a digital art and whatever.
Yeah.
So we're still early, which is awesome, because I think the future, you know, I heard in a podcast not too long ago, I love this description. It's a woman, a CTO of a company, and she said, the history is immutable and the future isn't written yet. So, you know, we don't know where the future is going, but I can tell you some things based on your question that I think around mobility. So
Yeah.
we've already discussed at length our vision of a decentralized Web3 Internet of Mobility network. So
Yeah.
now I think the use case and the value proposition of that over a more centralized Web2 has been, you know, I think fully discussed by us. But then you ask about identity. So decentralized identity is another Web3 tool that allows people not just about maybe monetizing their data, which is one thing that you can do with your identity in a Web3 model, but also control how your identity data is used by whom, for what purpose, and when they have access to it. So, and you can have that identity carried with you wherever you go and ported to whatever Web3 interface you use. So I could have a single tool for capturing my identity, and my identity could be everything I want it to be. It could be my Ph.D. diploma. It could be my driver's record. By the way, I don't have a driver's license, so I don't have it. It could be my online activity, how many Twitter followers I have. It could be economic bank records.
Yeah.
Okay. It could be all these things. And all these things are stored in my private identity file that I can carry with me wherever I go and plug into whatever I want. But it doesn't mean, let's say I did have a driver's license. It doesn't mean that, okay, I'm using a Internet of Mobility enabled platform and there's a car sharing service. That car sharing service needs to know I have a driver's license and I'm at least 25. Now, I know a lot of your listeners, if they can see me, would be, wow, he's not 25. He's got to be younger than that. But no, I'm definitely older than 25. Okay. So
no, you look younger. You look younger.
So my point being, I could have all this data about me. That doesn't mean that this car sharing service needs to have all that data. I have all this aggregated data about my person in a decentralized ID, and I can choose what data that car sharing service can see about me to enable me to get that car, unlock the car. So yeah, they need my driver's license, but I'll say something else that's really interesting. You could have a decentralized ID where there's a third-party attestation that you have a driver's license, that you're over 25, yada, yada. And therefore, when I go to Toronto and I want to unlock a car share service with an IOM-powered app, go back to Via Rail as an example. Okay, I'm using that app. I want to unlock a car share. It's quite possible that the car share service doesn't even have to see my driver's license. They need to see the attestation from a recognized third party that says, yes, this person does have a valid driver's license, and yes, they're over 25. So it's possible the car share service never even saw my driver's license. They just saw evidence that I have it, and that's all they needed. So decentralized ID is very powerful as an example of a Web3 tool, and you brought that one up. And it's not just about monetizing my user data, it's about controlling my data and taking it with me and expanding what my personal data can be
Yeah.
So that's a powerful thing that could be very useful for mobility, as we just described. I think we're going to see more NFT use cases in mobility, and you and I have talked about that off the record. We might talk about that here for a range of things. One of the coolest things I'm excited about we're going to do at Iomob around NFTs. So I mentioned early in the call, there's at least 1.5 billion privately owned cars in the world.
Yeah.
I believe the future of an Internet of Mobility network is not just plugging in APIs from public and shared vehicle fleets. It's allowing private vehicle owners to connect their vehicles to the Internet of Mobility network with a smart contract that allows them to say, okay, I only allow people who are over 25, who have a driver's license, have not had an accident in 2 years, whatever my requirements are. An NFT can enable that. I can easily access an NFT, plug in the terms I want in a smart contract online, and I just turn my car on when I want it to be turned on at an airport or whatever, and I can turn it off when I don't want it on. And so when you ask about like the power of Web3, another thing for me, it's not just the NFT, but it goes back to sort of the ethos of decentralization and some of our other discussions on optimizing the transport network. We know this, your listeners know this, 95% of the time cars are parked.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's just stupid. And 25 to 30% of congestion in cities is people trying to find where to park. So, I mean, we have a lot of inefficiencies in our system. If you can enable privately owned vehicles, and this doesn't just mean your car in your garage, it could be like, what about all the used cars on a car lot that are for sale and just sitting there, wasting, they're depreciating in value and underutilized, wasting land, a wasted resource. Why not plug those in with NFTs? Because a used car dealer doesn't have an API for their private cars on their fleet. Allow those to be exposed. Why not a corporate fleet? Corporate fleets are not used at all on the weekends. Why not plug those into the IOM with an NFT when you want? And there, what you're doing is you're adding all the supply to the IOM network so that they can all compete and collaborate to offer a more seamless user experience where the best vehicle for me right now is available to me. It might be your private car, it could be the corporate fleet car, could be a car share, could be a train, could be a carpool. Whatever's best for me, I will see the best options for me. And the better we can get like a global supply network to be connected to this, the better it is. And one last example that will probably blow you away, because this, I think in 2024-ish, we'll start seeing these use cases with the IOM network.
Yeah.
If you are a last mile logistics company, all right, your drivers have usually one vehicle. They have a bike or a scooter or a car. They don't have everything. What if they don't need to have any car or vehicle? And what if IOM network delivers to them the best vehicle for the journey they need to take? They need to go 8 blocks to deliver Chinese food. Well, there's a scooter right outside. And maybe that's a fleet scooter, or it's my private scooter that I leave out there with my NFT. It doesn't matter. And then that same driver in the next journey, they need to go all across town to deliver a big box of heavy books. Well, they might need car share for that, but they only need it for an hour, so they can pull on a local vehicle for that. So if you think about this at scale, if you really do seamlessly connect the world's mobility services to a decentralized network of mobility, you can empower so many amazing use cases that will make the planet greener, improve our quality of life, and improve our transport ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Boyd. I mean, I really loved all the 3 examples you mentioned, and never thought in that way. So thank you for sharing. And I think you rightly mentioned with these technology, it's possible, which was not possible. I mean, I remember I launched the first booking services, a car sharing, not car sharing, a ride sharing services for passenger in Delhi with one of the guy, and we use telephone and we use some device. We never thought the smartphone will come and then you don't need all these things. And smartphone will take away everything. And I think with blockchain now, what you mentioned, the delivery guy don't need to own any vehicle. He can pick his vehicle depending on what kind of thing he need to deliver. So you don't deliver only food, you can deliver logistic packages, you can deliver cartons, and you can also deliver the small packages depending on them. And you can pick your vehicle. You can draw from that and all. So thank you for sharing. I mean, it's really powerful. I mean, I can keep asking you to share more and more example because it's giving me a very different perspective. And I like you said, future is not written yet, so we don't know how it will be. But what it looked that there will be a lot of these things will turn into reality, and I'm looking forward to that. Now let's talk about NFT. You briefly mentioned about that. I recently was talking with one of the transit agencies, and I mentioned to them that probably the transit agencies can sell NFT to make money. And I got a very weird look. I know why, because they still feel it's a crazy idea. On the surface, like you mentioned, NFT seems to be just a glorified image. We heard of news of people paying millions for boring app pick, rock pick. They are charging millions of dollars and all. But I would say you are the first one in the industry who has already launched an NFT with Brightline Train with the public transit agencies, and it's already live on OpenSea platform. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, this is the one you are, and you are already selling these mobster. I would love to know what these mobster stories all about, and selling 100 NFT for them. But you have planned to hire local artists in 100 cities around the world and planning to profile local scenes and vehicle like you did for Brightline Train and all. I'm keen to know more about this project, what kind of response you're getting right now, and how did Brightline Train react to your idea initially? Like when you talk to them and say, hey, I want to sell NFT of your system, what was their reaction? And what is your overall vision for this idea? How you want to convince other agencies to do it?
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's, we're talking so seriously about very important things in the world, and then now I'm popping up some images of some mobsters in Miami, but that's part of it too, right? Like injecting some fun into transportation, into mobility, and also engaging a younger audience who are more sort of adept at NFTs and all the rest of it. There are several reasons why we came up with this campaign. We call them mobsters because it's mobility monsters. And what we're doing is drawing on local and regional animals. So first deployment is Miami because Brightline is based in Miami. So local and regional animals, local and regional vehicles, highlighting our clients' vehicles when our clients have, their own vehicles, because as I mentioned, not all of them do when they have their own vehicle service.
Yeah.
Highlighting local scenes, trying to play off the sustainability image, and using a local artist in each of the cities where we'll do this in, which, as you said, over time, it's 100 cities, 100 NFTs per city. That's 10,000 NFTs over time. Probably going to take us at least a few years to do this because we want to tie it to deployments where the IOM network is being deployed around the world.
Yeah.
As you said, we engaged Brightline, and you asked what the reaction was. I think what I would say is it depends on who I asked at Brightline. There was one of the people I love at Brightline. He's one of our primary sort of collaborators. He said, "Don't talk to me about NFTs." Like, didn't want to talk about. He's done with NFTs. He's heard about them enough. He's not interested in them. Didn't see the value in it. But then other people in the organization were like, yeah, this is cool. Like, would this make us the first rail operator in the world with our own NFTs? Which I think it does.
Yeah.
Which is another reason we're doing it, is to sort of help our clients gain prestige and brand and cachet by being early in the sort of blockchain and NFT space. There's going to be benefits of which I'm not allowed to entirely say publicly, but owners of these NFTs will get an airdrop later this year. And an airdrop, for your listeners who are less familiar with them, is a way a blockchain project can deposit something of value or not. Could be a benefit, like, for example, access to, in blockchain, all the blockchain projects use something called Discord. Discord is like Slack for your users if they know what Slack is, but it's for community engagement. And what's common with an NFT and an airdrop is that if you own an NFT, you get some kind of exclusive privileges to get inside information about the project before others do. So it's like the NFT can be used as a ticket of entry to a privileged club by having one. So these are all the reasons we want to celebrate our deployments. We want to celebrate local sustainability, celebrate mobility, and incentivize adoption and use by younger generations, and help our clients tap into that sort of new ethos around NFTs and the excitement around it. So those are all the reasons why we've done it. And, the response has been very positive. As you say, I think we're the first company in mobility to do this, and we like being first. So we're going to continue to do being first. Our next first is the first mobility company in the metaverse. So that's coming soon too.
Yeah, that's my next question. So that's coming. But for NFT, I love what you mentioned, because I see a lot of these transit agencies, like I've been in London and in Singapore, in Hong Kong, they are creating a lot of these station art. I mean, if you go to some of these cities, they have such a rich history, and they have created a lot of local arts, which is in a physical world exists. I mean, and I really see the value they can monetize it by converting into a digital world. And I think, I mean, this is just a first project, but I see more and more adoption will happen, and people will see the value, because sometimes they don't see it, so they don't believe it. So now if they see this and they can believe it easily, that it's possible, it's workable, people are buying it, and it's interesting. It's like how to engage the younger population into the system. So younger population, like I have a habit to collect the mobility smart card from all the transit system I visit. So I have this habit. I have more than 50 cards right now, but in future, so I already bought one. But this is my future collection going to be the NFT from around the world of transit network.
Awesome.
Now let's talk about metaverse. That's a topic which, again, I get a very weird look, because people think metaverse is about virtual gaming, and it done nothing to do with the real world and all, which is true, but at the same time it's changing. So what could be possibly have to do with Internet of Mobility? What do you think metaverse will play a role? And because your focus is a real life transportation ecosystem, you don't want to push people in the digital world. I must say, during my research, I learned a new term, which is called MTA, Metaverse Travel Agency. I never heard about this term. I'm so curious to learn more about it, because it's a term. If I knew first time, I think many people who are listening to this, they would have never heard about this. So Iomob is looking to enable MTAs in metaverse. So you are trying to create more and more metaverse travel agencies. Can you share how it will work? Also, I want to share, like, I'm a big time podcast listener and a big fan of Balaji Srinivasan. He's a blockchain guru. And he recently shared that how metaverse will change immigration policy, as people can travel in virtual world. So like in real world, you need visas, you need work permission to travel in different country. Like you work in different countries, so you know how difficult sometimes it is to give all those permission and all. But in metaverse, you don't need any immigration permission. You will be tomorrow teleport to USA or in UK or in Australia. So how will you manage those digital crime in the space? I was thinking about the ticketless traveler in virtual TTC network. How will people control things in metaverse?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, I think underlying some of your questions and probably your listeners' questions that are emerging is like, what does real travel even have to do with the metaverse? If the metaverse, as you said, is a virtual environment of made up worlds, and the whole idea of the metaverse is you can freely travel around the world or around virtual worlds without actually getting out of your seat. That's one view of the metaverse, but I think, there's growing, I don't think I would call it a consensus, because I think there are people that are even very deeply active in the metaverse that would not have the same view I do of what the metaverse is. Kind of like what we just described about MaaS, like a lot of different definitions. I love gray. So I believe entrepreneurship is all about managing in gray, not black and white. That there is almost nothing that is black and white in the world of entrepreneurship. You ask, I mean, look at my example. I go pitch Iomob to 10 venture funds, and I'll get 10 different responses to, could we become a massive global internet of mobility or not? And and 10 different reasons why we will or won't, and 10 different strategy suggestions, and none of them would be aligned probably.
Yeah.
So that means there is no black and white in entrepreneurship, which is why I love it. And I don't think there's black and white in MaaS, and there's not black and white in what the metaverse is. For me, the metaverse is a digital technologies that allow humans to engage with each other and other objects and things, potentially just for digital lives, or that benefit their real life in the real world, or IRL as we talk about.
Yeah.
So if you think about like a metaverse that's like just a virtual world, like Sandbox is one of the best. Decentralized, those are two really big metaverses that are virtual worlds only at the moment. And the only things you can buy in those, well, that's not true. I was going to say the only thing you can buy in those worlds are digital goods, but that's not true anymore. You can now go to Sandbox, see a sneaker on somebody's avatar, but it's like, it looks like a real sneaker. It's a Nike.
Yeah.
And you can click on that Nike and say, I want that as an NFT for my avatar, and I want that as a physical shoe sent to my house. And you can pay $100 or whatever it is. You earn the NFT for your avatar, and you literally get a the physical shoe to your size sent to your house.
Yeah.
In a virtual metaverse of foreign lands that don't exist. So we're already seeing the blending of bricks and mortar commerce and Web 2 and metaverse, even in the virtual versions of the metaverse. But I'm going to share with you my favorite recent discovery over the last month.
Yeah.
Is a metaverse called The Next Earth. The Next Earth is built to scale with satellite images of the real planet Earth. I'm zooming out now. That was actually my house in San Cugat, Spain. And as I zoom out, you see that I'm in Spain and I can travel anywhere in the world with this. Bringing in travel. I'm going somewhere. I'm not going to put your home address in. I don't know what it is, but you probably don't want me to put it in on you. You can see all these squares, and the ones that are untaken can be bought as virtual land. Okay.
Oh.
So the Next Earth sells virtual land ownership over real satellite images of the Earth. And their vision is to turn this into a platform as a service.
Okay.
And what they mean by platform as a service is this becomes a digital layer of a metaverse that can then be used to enable Web 2 and bricks and mortar and Web 3 companies to engage with users in their metaverse, to offer new kinds of goods and services or existing ones, and use it as a new distribution channel. So let me show you something. So they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I think it is, 8 different what they call screen modes. So if you go satellite street mode, you see the street names and the points of interest and things like that. And then you can click on this one. It looks a little bit more like a Google or Apple map. It's actually built on Mapbox. So it's Mapbox mapping tools. All right. So I'm dropping on this podcast what would be called in blockchain an alpha. Alpha is giving your listeners first access to something no one else knows about yet. Yeah. And I'm only doing this now because I believe by the time this goes live, the news will be official. It can be public. I hope so.
I hope.
We're going to partner. Iomob is partnering with the Next Earth to add a new layer to this, and it'll be the transportation layer. So it'll be an extra, what they call screen mode. You click on transportation, and what you'll end up seeing is something more like this, which is built by Iomob, which is our map of the Earth with transportation ecosystems embedded. So we use GTFS, GBFS, all these different sort of classical standard API or data sharing tools for public transit and rail service. The blue you see is public transit and the red is rail. So these are like real networks, for example, in Europe. So
It's
what
look
you'll
amazing. This can be sold as an art.
thanks. Yeah. You know, you should see our team has done that's super cool. It looks even cooler almost. Is
Yeah.
we have heat maps. And we've never seen anyone else do this before. We can do heat maps that can show you from a point on the map to another point on the map, how long would it take a user to get there using multimodal mobility. So we've seen heat maps for public transit or for cars,
Yeah.
but multimodal heat map, like, all right, well, maybe the fastest way is a scooter to a train rather than, you know, being stuck in an hour-long traffic. And because we have all these vehicles connected, we can actually do a heat map that can model in real time, like waves of how far you can go in a 15-minute city or 30-minute city, combining different services rather than just relying on one mode. So my point, going back to what we're going to do with the Next Earth and the Metaverse, is we also have our journey planner in this thing. So you can like pick out points on a map, and then our journey planner will, automatically generate routes for people. Right now, our journey planner only does inner city within the same country, but for the Next Earth, we're going to enable global journey planning. Okay. So you want to go from your house in Toronto to my office in Barcelona, you'll be able to put the origin address and destination address, see a range of options. Okay. And the Metaverse travel agency. So because Iomob is an enterprise digital layer of the Internet of Mobility Network, we don't offer this to end user direct. We empower enterprise to do it. So we will we will enable Web3 Metaverse travel agencies, as well as airlines and other travel companies and other transport and whoever wants to offer a real booking experience where you can, as a user, visualize your journey in their metaverse before you book. It's like a preview before you pay. And one of the most exciting things I think that we want to do together with them, because the Next Earth and Iomob share a passion for climate action, is, if you think about it, like, let's say I'm going to go from Barcelona to Paris. Yeah. My inclination is I'm going to go to an airline booking site and book a flight. But if I go to the Next Earth and I have the option of different modes of getting to Paris from Barcelona, and one of them is a high-speed train, takes 5 hours. Yeah, the flight takes an hour and a half, but I still have to get to the airport. I have to wait at the airport. I have to go through immigration. I have to do all this crap. You know, most of the time airports are not near your urban area. So you have this travel to and from 2 different airports, which then adds more money because I got to pay for taxis. And because Iomob can enable a door-to-door journey plan, we can show you the whole cost of taking that journey and the time it takes to do the whole journey door to door. And if we could show the CO2, which of course a lot of people are doing one way or another to try to nudge the right behavior, that's fine. But what about the next step? What about, I see that it would actually really take me 4 hours door to door in the plane. It's going to end up costing me 200 euros because of the taxis and all the rest. I could take the high-speed train, takes me 5 hours, but I get to go door to door. I have internet access, and well, let me see before I buy what stops. What will I see along the way? So in the Next Earth, because it's a satellite image of the real Earth, what we can do is send in the geo coordinates of every train station that you stop in on this high-speed train along the way, and let the user like virtually go past each of these stations in the satellite version of the world. And we believe that visualization of that journey and the cool towns you might see, and another way of seeing the carbon impact and the full journey time and the full cost of the journey, not just the plane, it could help nudge people to make more sustainable choices. So the idea is an immersive preview of a journey that you can book in the metaverse. And there's one last stop to this journey, at least, that we're going to do together. Iomob already has this thing we call it a companion app. The companion app allows a user to book a journey in a third-party interface. Could be a travel agency, could be a separate app, could be a website, could be a kiosk. Wherever you book it, you can pull it into this companion app. And now the companion app has your origin and destination station or airport information. So we now know that you're going to depart at 10 a.m. at this day from this train station or this airport and arrive at this station or airport at this time. And then we can help the user assemble their first and last mile around that, and then solve their destination mobility service when they get there. And by doing this as a companion app, you can book in the metaverse. I mean, I'm using literally my laptop for this, right? Like if I booked in the metaverse, I can't bring my laptop and have it scanned, my ticket scanned from my laptop very easily at the train station or the airport. So you can pull the journey in with your QR code or whatever into your phone and then manage your whole mobility journey in the phone because it goes with you. And with Next Earth, they want to collaborate with us to make those journeys carbon negative. So carbon offsets and other ways. And there's another cool thing. I'm sorry, I'm probably going too long. I'm going to blow away your listeners.
Yeah.
This is super alpha because nobody knows this yet. So hopefully it'll be known, able to be known by the time we go live. If you own virtual land, imagine you own in the Next Earth Sants train station in Barcelona. Any revenue that is generated by Iomob from transaction revenue, from you booking a journey, from somebody else booking a journey from Sants in the metaverse, so we get a small transaction fee, we will be sharing that transaction fee either in the form of tokens or revenue with the virtual landowner of the train station in Barcelona. So it's this totally cool hybrid mixed reality, real world meets virtual world in the metaverse, where revenue, bookings, and user experiences can more seamlessly travel between the metaverse and the real world and have hopefully real world climate impacts on top of it.
That's amazing. What you describe, it sounds so amazing to me, and I would love to see when it will be coming live and see like you can now own the stations. Like in real world, I can't, but in virtual land, I can. I want to own a Union Station in Toronto. So, and anything coming in the virtual world, you can make use of that. And I think that's a real way of making it owned by people rather than owned by one institution and one agency and all. And I think one other use case I see is in future people can, and we discussed about this point many more time in the past, is about having those carbon credit miles. Like if you can show that you, instead of taking a trip by plane, you must have emitted this much of carbon. Now you took that trip by more sustainable mode. So it validate that you earn those carbon credit, and in future you can tie up and you can monetize those carbon credit as well. So to me, it's look like people actually will make money by traveling and making those journey, so they can make more money than than taking planes and all.
Hopefully.
No, that'll be great, and I wish you good luck with your launch with Next Earth and all. And like you said, by the time we'll be in public, it will be available, and I'll be the first user to check it out and see how it is. How does it look? So awesome. Now I want to discuss about digital currency. You talk about that point quite many number of times. You mentioned that Iomob tokens. So a lot of people think that Bitcoin is the original currency or is the only currency in blockchain world. But I think right now there are more than 5,000 cryptocurrency, and I'm wrong because there'll be many more. So I want to learn about the token economics. You mentioned briefly earlier about that Iomob token and how it will be owned by people, not by Iomob. It will be owned by the people who will be participating in this network. So how does this whole economic model will work, and how can one transit agency pick one over the other? So like there are so many these tokens and application will emerge. What choice the transit agencies can have to pick one over the other?
Yeah, so crypto is exploding. The diversity of options that are available to retail investors in terms of investing in crypto and tokens And of course, as you say, I think there'll be a growing amount of options for transit agencies and the transportation community regarding tokens that are directly tied to the transportation mobility ecosystem. So, first of all, crypto is not, there are some sort of very passionate people who are like diehard about a particular currency. Like you find a lot of, they call them maximalists or maxis. So Bitcoin maxis or Ethereum maxis who are just diehard about their currency. And sometimes for good reasons, but in the end, there's no requirement that a transit agency tries to pick one winner. There's certainly ways they could collaborate with more than one. And I think, the word collaboration in the context of crypto is so profound. By default, the crypto world is way more collaborative than you would find in most traditional tech industries. So it's more likely that there will be ways to build off each other, to combine currencies, to leverage tokens interchangeably. If you look at the emergence of wallets for people to buy and sell and trade and use crypto, increasingly those are becoming more interoperable across currencies and across token networks. So you can sort of more fluidly as an end user engage with any token you want. So I think that will happen. Regarding transit agencies, how they should proceed forward with a token model.
Yeah.
I think, it's tricky because you said it earlier, there tend to be, when you brought up how they react to your NFT idea. It's not easy to get a transit agency to get their minds around what's happening with tokens, token economics, and how to engage in that. And I think early on, in the case of Iomob, you asked about our token economics model, there's no requirement that the public or private agencies who engage with Iomob actually have to be savvy around blockchains or tokens at all. We can sort of hide the complexity of blockchain and crypto from partners in the ecosystem who aren't ready for it. They don't have, they can just carry on their business as they usually do, settle transactions as they usually do. Over time, there will be more on-chain settlement, which basically means that when you have transactions aggregating between supply and demand partners and end users, over time, more of that could actually be resolved on chain, which, increases trust and has a lot of benefits for the ecosystem. But if they're not ready, they're not ready, and that's fine. And a transit agency in the current version of our token economics model has no requirement to acquire tokens or be engaged in the token economy in a meaningful way. We think over time they will, and they will also accrue token benefits because we have this thing called proof of mobility services, POMS, and that's around validating that ecosystem partners have actually contributed to the growth of journeys being booked in the IOM ecosystem. And if you're contributing because you're providing services to the network, you're providing transit, and people are booking that in the network, then you're helping contribute to the growth of the network. And that's great for everybody. It's a true network effect where the more supply is in, the better it is for the demand partners, the better it is for end users, and it keeps going in a virtuous circle. So we want to encourage that, and that will include token benefits. So a transit agency will actually accrue token incentives just for having their service available in the network. That doesn't mean they know how to handle the tokens right now. Like, do they have a wallet that they can receive those tokens? How do they handle it on accounting and auditing and reporting? So it's going to be a while until I think we see that kind of use case go mainstream where the transit agency is proactively engaged and involved in a token economy. But I think we'll start to see this year, whether the transit agencies know it or not, that they're actually involved in token ecosystems and they're involved in blockchain-based networks like Iomobs. So it's coming to a city near them and a community near them, whether they're aware of it or ready for it or not.
No, that's a good point you mentioned about that. That it's their choice whether they want to get involved and go deep into that, or they want to see a little bit before moving forward. And they need to create a basic infrastructure. Like for currency, you need bank account, but for tokens, you need a wallet. So you need to have those kind of infrastructure ready before even you move into that area. In fact, my next question, and actually this is my last question. We had so much of fun in discussion so far, but I know it's going very long. But this is my last question, and actually it's about you're already working with many partners around the world. Like you already mentioned about you launch NFT collection with Brightline Trains in Miami. But can you share more detail about other key partners which you're working? And also from a transit agency point of view, what should be the first step if any transit agencies want to move into this area? Any suggestion on the process? Because it's not like tomorrow I wake up and say, okay, I want to do something. There must be some process and there should be some preparatory work to start and a hell. And why I'm asking this question, because a lot of agencies tell me that they are open to experiment. They want to experiment and do pilots, but they want to make sure that they can go back and revert back to the original situation quickly. They don't want to create any dependency if nothing, if something doesn't work or if nothing work. So in short, they don't want to get stuck, because for example, if they launch a blockchain wallet and they do it for 2-3 months and then suddenly they say, okay, there is no blockchain wallet anymore, so what will happen to the user who adopted and all? So how one can ensure that if they decided to move forward, there is an option for them to get back, or there is no option to get back?
Yeah, I could see why transit agencies would feel it quite risky to go all in on a blockchain model early on, and they're used to doing, as you say, pilots and staging in transformation, digital transformation. You also asked initially in your question around who we partner with already. So you mentioned Brightline is our first US commercial client. We did an initial project, like a trial with Ford in Pittsburgh. This was a few years ago. We did a trial with Wellington in New Zealand. We see ourselves as a born global firm. So we're based in Barcelona, but we have a team in Dubai and London and a few other markets as well, but we're mostly based in Barcelona. This is going public very soon. I think I can say it here anyway, but another commercial client of ours is London Northeastern Rail, which is a UK rail operator. It goes from London to Aberdeen, Scotland. We go live with them in May, so end of May, early June. So it's coming soon. And then, as we talked about earlier, we have quite a few new projects emerging, like the Next Earth, which is a global project. We also have several suppliers, as we talked about, like Bolt and Tier and Boy and Via, and many other big national, regional, or global suppliers connected to our ecosystem. And we also have, now I'm not at liberty to say the names, but we have one of the world's largest automated fare collection companies as a partner. They operate in dozens of cities, maybe 100 cities or more around the world. A very large company as a partner, and I think in the next few months that will be public. And we have another partner, which is one of the world's largest system integrators. That partnership is currently constrained to one national request for proposal opportunity, which is really exciting because it's a very, very large country where the national rail operator is looking for a solution like what we offer. And the partnership is for Iomob to work with this global system integrator to deliver this sort of door-to-door rail experience for a whole very large nation. So that's another example of a partnership we have. With respect to moving forward as a transit agency with baby steps, I guess, and experimentation, certainly playing around with NFTs is a very light way of, as you've tried, is a light way that doesn't necessarily, impact core operations. It's an experiment that you can do kind of in an isolated way. I think, connecting your service to a company like Iomob, where you're not required to necessarily go deep in blockchain at all to be part of it, but then you can learn. One of the things that everyone in blockchain says, for people that want to learn more about these projects and crypto and everything, one of the first recommendations you always hear is find a project you're interested in and engage in that project. So go into their Discord channel. I mentioned Discord before as like the main community engagement and management tool that all blockchain projects use. I've gotten deep in the Next Earth Discord channel, and I'm really engaged with their community. And it's been a way for me to learn more about their community, but also just learn more about blockchain from different use cases, in this case, Metaverse, and what's possible for my company just by understanding better their community and what they want.
Yeah.
So my point would be, for example, a transit agency could come to the IOM Discord channel and just start kind of tracking the conversations and engage in conversation. That's super low-hanging fruit that doesn't require anything but some time. So there's got to be somebody at almost every transport agency in the world that's interested in blockchain, that's studying its impacts and trying to figure out what it could do for them. Come visit our Discord channel and dive in, and you don't have to make any commitment. You don't have to have any tokens to be involved in the Discord, and you can start asking questions of the community and engage and learn without doing anything. As far as like going beyond that to actually like taking a step more concrete in the blockchain world, I would say, again, the first thing would be maybe do it at an arm's length where you're participating as a transit agency, providing services into a blockchain project, whether that's one around data, could be a blockchain project just around mobility data and how you can monetize and capture transportation data and do stuff with it in blockchain. And that's a super safe thing, right? Because you're not changing your transportation offer to users. You're just experimenting with a new data platform. There's another step, for example, that can happen in the IOM journey, which I think would be, I'm really excited for this to happen sometime. We had a conversation with a national, it's actually a ministry that has transportation within it. It's a national one in Europe. And they are interested in maybe trying to have governance rights of a national level DAO to the IOM for their country. So they're a national transportation agency. Their interest, it's super early exploration. But one idea is that they could basically operate that sub DAO in the IOM network, and they could choose to offer co-ownership rights to that DAO to private transportation companies, to private citizens who can now co-own their local, their national transportation ecosystem and have influence over the governance. So basically, there's a whole range of things that could be done depending on the commitment level of the transit agency. But I think, in most cases, there are some very accessible baby steps they can do without any meaningful commitment at all.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Boyd. I really love the way you structure it. It's always getting involved in the community, which doesn't cost any money, and it's a way to learn. And in fact, there is a funny thing, like in this new technology, blockchain, metaverse, and NFT, you don't have anybody with 10 or 20 years of experience. People who has experiences probably 2 years or 1 year because these technologies are so new. So nobody can claim that I have 10 or 20 years of experience in metaverse or NFT because it's
if they
so
do,
new.
Don't believe them. They're lying.
They don't believe them. So the only way is to learn. And that's what we are seeing. Like a lot of venture funds are hiring young people as a partners and all for crypto and Web3. And I think for transit agencies as well, probably their young employee can be their ambassador, getting involved in the Discord channel and in the Telegraph and all. In fact, I'll be happy to put the link of Discord channel of Iomob so that if people are interested, they can join the conversation and be part of the community. Right. And I think that's a way to learn. Collaborate, which you mentioned earlier too. Collaborate, and collaborate.
I agree.
So thank you so much. We learned so much about the blockchain side, technology side, about Iomob, but now it's time to learn more about you. We got a little bit glimpse in your career, but I want to now know a little bit more of your personal side, what you love to do, what you want to do. So we have this rapid fire question round, and generally we have these 5 questions and we ask people. And today I added a new question for you because I want to give you a bit surprise. So my first question, if you're ready, I'll start.
Let's go.
Okay. So my first question, if you were not in education or blockchain sector, what other profession you would have selected?
Probably be a venture investor, probably leading an investment DAO where I would work with a community of people with aligned interests, for example, around blockchain projects that have an impact on climate, and invest in the ones that we like most, because I've not always had the most fun experiences with investors, and I feel like I know I could be a good one that would actually. It's funny, every venture fund always promises they're like very founder friendly, but very few of them actually are.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe I would be, because I've experienced the pain of being on the other side.
That's important. And that's what I feel is you should always have empathy for founders and entrepreneurs. It's not easy, man. It's not easy to start something, even if it's a stupid idea. But still they are taking the first step, and whenever you are starting your fund, let me know. I'll be first person to join.
Sounds good.
So regarding your question, and you mentioned you already traveled so much around the world, you've seen so many cities and all. Which is your favorite city in the world?
This will probably sound like I'm biased, but I don't think I am. Barcelona. So I live in Barcelona now, but you know, the quick backstory is I actually lived in Madrid 20 years ago, and 13 years ago or so, I met my future wife, and early in our engagements and our interactions, I asked her a question. I said, if you could live in any 3 cities in the world, which ones would they be? And we had 2 of the same 3 cities, which is really strange because she's from Venezuela, I'm from the US, and we overlapped in 2 of the cities, and they were Buenos Aires and Barcelona. And we actually, after that, lived in Buenos Aires, and now we live in Barcelona. And Barcelona was our #1 choice. And as you say, I've lived in many cities and countries in the world, and I've traveled to many more. And so we chose Barcelona because it was our favorite city. So that's why I'm here.
That's and whatever your wife say is the best answer. So if your wife is happy, your life is happy. In fact,
sure.
I'll be there in Barcelona next year, so will be great opportunity to catch up in person and see the city. And like you mentioned, you lived, you spent time in a lot of the city, and you also mentioned you don't really have a driving license. I mean, you have, but you don't use it too much.
No, I don't have one.
Oh, you don't have one. So you
No.
are the best user of public transport network. So my next question is, which city has the best transit network in the world?
So this might surprise you and your listeners, because I think I might be inclined to say Amsterdam. And the reason I would say Amsterdam isn't so much for the public transit network, which is pretty good, but because they embrace what an old head of urban planning for Buenos Aires once told me in his office, Daniel Chain in Argentina. He said, because we were debating this very question for an event we were hosting around, like, if we were going to invite someone from a city to discuss best practices in transportation, who would we invite? And he said something to me that stuck with me ever since, which is, Boyd, the best transportation policy is the best urban planning policy. And whatever city does urban planning the best, that reduces the need to travel in vehicles or even in public transit, is the best best transit city. And I lived in Amsterdam for 3 months when we were in Techstars, which is a accelerator for tech startups in Amsterdam a couple of years ago. And as CEO, I had to be the one who suffered and spent 3 months living in Amsterdam. And I rented they have this big famous company there now called Swap Fees, which is a monthly bike rental service.
Okay.
And I signed up for that right after moving there. And yeah, I just explored the whole region on bike, never almost ever got in a car, and didn't need to, because everything is so accessible by bike there. And, you know, every year they're making it harder and harder to drive a car there. I think it's over like a 5-year plan. They're going to reduce something like 15,000 parking spaces in the core of the city. So, you know, the best transit city is the one that doesn't need transit, because you can get around without it. You can go on a bike, and their transit system is quite good. But you know, the ability to bike in Amsterdam, of course, is insane. And so that's why they get #1 from me.
No, I will not forget this line now. Is like the best transit city, the city which has the best urban planning. So
Yeah.
this line will now remain with me. And now my next question is, which is unique for you, is what are you most excited about this or next year? What do you think will kind of change?
I mean, if you're referring to sort of things that directly relate to Iomob, I would certainly say the adoption of blockchain and the mainstreaming of blockchain into more IRL, in real life applications, including mobility. I think, it's really starting to take off now. And I'm really excited about that because I really believe there's this term that I've embraced called regenerative crypto economics, which is this idea that you can bake into token economic models and crypto regenerative economic and ecological benefits to society. So positive externalities baked into blockchain and baked into the token economics. And I believe we're going to start to see a lot more of those use cases like Iomob go mainstream and get, get attention and buy-in from ecosystem stakeholders. And I'm very excited about that because that poses the potential for us to, transform our society and our economies in a much accelerate our path towards a low carbon and more inclusive society, which is something that's long overdue.
And that's a great answer, and I'm too looking forward to that. That how these new technology will change the world this and next year, because last 2 years were remarkable, and I think the pace will now further accelerate in next couple of years or this year. So I'm also looking forward, and like you said, seeing this internet mobility thing becoming mainstream will be fun. Now, my last question is, and I don't know, because you are at a very good position right now, you have fun in life. If still you can change one thing in your life, what would it be?
Change one thing in my life, what would it be? My son lives in Canada and I would want him to be living with us. He's of age to live where he wants. He's just out of high school. And I miss him. So I would change the physical location of my son from Vancouver. No offense, I know you live in Canada, to Barcelona, so he could be with us and his sister on a regular basis. I know you're probably thinking of something more professional, but everything else, that's the thing I would change.
That's great. No, being a father too, I can imagine what you're saying. It's whenever I go away on a trip, that's the thing you miss is the family. And I think that's more important. That's why I hate when people say metaverse is just living in a virtual world, because I think life happen in IRL, in real life. So you can't escape from that. So thank you so much, Boyd. I mean, I would say that in last 1.5 hours, we had such a learning session. I learned a lot of new terms and all. It's like a power pack session. I couldn't have collected this knowledge in 3 months or 3 years, which I learned in 1.5 hours. So thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it, and wish you good luck with a lot of these upcoming projects.
Thank you, Jospel. I hope we didn't bore your listeners and they don't fall asleep halfway through such a long session.
No, they will be awake and they will be more energetic, and probably you will receive more email for questions from them.
I hope so.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this podcast. We will be inviting some other inspiring guests in the coming week. You can subscribe to this podcast online to get the notification for the next episode. If you like this podcast, please don't forget to give us a 5-star rating, as it will help us to spread our message. If you have any feedback or suggestion for this podcast, please do write to us at info@mobility-innovators.com. I look forward to see you next time.